Good morning from Toronto. My name is John Keogh, and welcome to the Future of Food 10 by 10 Expert Series. In this series, I'll speak with 10 experts to get their views and opinions, and more importantly, I'll ask them about the key challenges and the opportunities in the food industry. And today, I'm delighted to have with me Alex Bromage. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, John.
Alex, the time goes very, very quickly. We have 10 minutes together. So, in the first 30 seconds to 1 minute, can you tell the listeners, the viewers, a little bit about who you are and where you work?
Yeah, I'm Alex Bromage. I'm the Senior Solutions Deployment Manager at Tetra Pak. I focus on our portfolio of global food safety and quality solutions that we deliver to our customers. I'm originally from England. I have a mechanical engineering background and an MBA, and I've been in Tetra Pak for 12 years.
Wonderful. Now, Tetra Pak works with the food industry, and you've been working with food, and I believe you also worked in pharmaceuticals. Now,
Yes.
coming from pharmaceuticals into food, are you seeing some capabilities or challenges within the food industry that organizations need to start working on?
Yes, I am actually. And I think there are three main challenges that I see. Particularly, I saw those when I came into the food industry from the pharmaceutical industry. And the first one would be that we're very focused around the regulatory food safety aspects of quality. Whereas from a pharmaceutical industry, there is much more holistic view of quality assurance. And then secondly, connecting quality all the way from the product into the process and into the supply chain as well. So those are the first two challenges that I think I see, which you get a good contrast in from the pharmaceutical industry looking to the food industry. I think the other challenge that I would say is there is a modernization challenge in the food industry from an operations perspective. And you could call it digitalization, digital transformation. But I think there is a challenge in that there's a large step that the industry needs to take, and that will help them address the first two challenges.
Wonderful. Now, we'll certainly come back to those challenges during the dialogue this morning, Alex. But then, what do you see as the key opportunities that the food industry could or should be working on right now?
Well, I think from the key opportunities, I actually think I can go back to the digitalization as well and digital
Yeah.
transformation. I wrote a recent article and that was published about, I think there's a food safety technology revolution coming. I think the emergence of the food tech startup sector has been very rapid in the last sort of 5 years. And it's a very exciting space. And there's a lot of new technology coming into the market, which I think has some really exciting potential for allowing the food industry, food producers to be able to start addressing those challenges in a meaningful way without necessarily having to go to the major large expenses that may have existed some years ago.
Gotcha. Now, if I circle back to the challenges, you mentioned regulatory and quality challenges, but also modernization. I'm intrigued by the modernization component. Do you think the food industry is lagging significantly or moderately behind the pharmaceutical industry with regard to the use of technology?
I, from my personal experience, I think there's no question that they are. I can give you a bit of an example. 12 years ago, when I was working in the pharmaceutical industry, we were already working on process data acquisition and closed loop control using multivariate sensors in the production processes. That was already being done already in large scale production in the pharmaceutical industry. I have yet to see that in a food production facility. I'm sure it does exist in some, maybe corners of the processing side or something like that. But in the areas that I see, I don't see anywhere near that level of sophistication. And, that's where I use the word modernization.
Gotcha, gotcha. Now, I want to mine into that a little bit more, certainly around the quality side. Often I hear that the focus in pharmaceutical with regard to quality is very robust and very, very stringent and very, very process oriented. But in the food industry, it's maybe I hear often checkers checking checkers and focused on compliance rather than the real quality control. What are you seeing in that area?
Yeah, I would agree with that to a large degree, and I think you can go back to the philosophy that use to look at it is through a lean principles and not a lean startup principle, but lean operations principles. In that you should be moving your quality processes further upstream, not further downstream. In food, we tend to rely almost solely on the end product checking before we release a product to go out to the market. We do have things like HACCP, but that just looks at the food safety, the real critical regulatory requirements in the process. What we need to do is we need to do how pharmaceutical does it, which is they put much more reliance on the success of the process steps as they occur in sequence than they do on the end product. The end product testing is really merely an afterthought in those processes to a large degree. If you've got to there and you fail, then something has failed much more clearly further down in the process. Whereas I think that as an industry generally, we are still far too reliant on those end product tests in order to know whether our product is good or not. And that's very wasteful. So we're losing food, so from a sustainability point of view, it's very poor. But it also means that you're not going to catch everything at that end product testing. So you are going to end up releasing bad product into the market. That's just a reality of the statistics of what you're working with. You can do the best that you can to check everything in the warehouse, but it's just not practical that you can check every package. So you need to put more effort into assuring that your processes are performing in the right way.
Gotcha. That's fascinating correlation between the two, identifying the key gaps that are in there. That's very important. Now, on the opportunities, Alex, you talked about digitization, and of course, digitization is the analog to digital, and then digitalization is the process automation and the role automation, and then of course we have digital transformation, which is more about culture and the focus on the customer. What are you seeing in the food industry right now with regard to those three steps, the moving to digital, process automation, and then the transformation?
Yeah, I think that we see a lot of very interesting stuff now that's emerging in helping those address those opportunities. I think the one area that I get most excited about is I'm seeing a strong emergence of sensing technology or sensing capabilities. So I was referring to the multivariate sensors before that we use in some processes in some pharmaceutical applications. I'm starting to see some startups emerging that are really looking into that sensing area and looking into using new sensing technology. So we're no longer just focusing on a pH meter or a temperature probe or a pressure sensor. We're starting to look at how can we use near infrared, how can we use other different laser sensing technologies or different spectral technologies, not only to test the process in process, but also then increase the speed of the end line testing as well compared to how it is maybe today. So that's one area that I'm quite excited about because I think we have a lot of sensors in the food production process already, but a lot of that data is recorded manually onto paper, and then it forms part of the release documentation for the batch, and some of that is part of the regulatory requirements. But I think the regulators are starting to really catch up to this as well, and really starting to take on board that we should be putting more trust into these digital systems. So I think as these technologies improve, and then the way that we store the data and report the data back is becoming more trustworthy, I think that we're going to see that we can start to make this change in the food industry.
Wonderful. That's a great example. And I want to mine into that just a little bit more. I often talk about blockchain as looking in your rearview mirror at the transactions that have occurred. And the sensors that you talk about give us the real-time information, the sensors from the actual devices or machines that are in operation. But then you have the predictive component, which AI can give you. So if you take the transaction data from your blockchain, you take your real-time sensors, what are you seeing in that area, and how important do you think it is to get to the predictive component in food manufacturing?
I think it's very important, but I think it's a really big hill for the food industry to climb because I think that the gap between being able to feed some sort of predictive model with the data that it requires and the way that we collect data today or the amount of data and the type of the data we collect, it's a very large gap between those two spaces. We're still looking at product good, product bad on an end point evaluation. So it's a discrete measurement. We need to be moving to continuous data sources. So we need those new sensors, that better sensing technology, We also then need to obviously remove the step where someone records it onto a piece of paper or into an Excel even, and that needs to be going straight into those databases to then start to be consumed by those models. And I think that we also need to understand that whilst this architecture could maybe be realistically done real time in a general sense, we really need to move that intelligence out to the edge. So then you've got to have companies. I don't think one single company could handle the breadth of the challenge themselves. So you have to have a whole list of companies who are willing to have interoperable standards for putting that sort of analytics and that sort of predictive capabilities on the edge in the process. And so I think there's it's a fantastic future that we can work towards, and I think it's where we should be moving to. But I don't think that we should kid ourselves that it's something that we could be doing in just a few months. It's a long journey that needs to be gone through.
It's a challenge for sure.
Yeah.
Now we're going to run over by a couple of minutes, and I'm okay with that because I have another question that I want to ask you, and I think this is quite important for viewers. In the pharmaceutical industry, have you experienced labeling issues like what we have in the food industry today? We have, many recalls in the food industry, and I think the bulk of them are because of labeling issues, allergens included. Are you seeing a big difference in the food industry, how the food industry is handling their labeling versus what you experienced in pharmaceuticals? And is that an issue of automation, business process intelligence, or is it human error in your experience?
Well, this is probably I probably can't talk too accurately to it, but I can generally say in pharmaceutical, you're required to obviously verify and validate your processes in a way that you're not in food. So the process is interrogated for its performance. Changes to the processes are interrogated for performance in ways that we wouldn't see as being possible in food. And you can argue whether that's right or wrong, or whether it's a function of the regulatory or the margins, a function of the high performance of the processes that pharmaceutical companies have. But you can very clearly see that on average, a pharmaceutical company does not have these problems.
Yeah.
They do not release product with an incorrect label, or they don't release incorrectly manufactured products so it doesn't match what the original label said, which I think is actually maybe the more real problem that we experience with food. One of the reasons they do that is they run much more clean production environments. The clean room standards that they have to work to are far higher. The gowning up, gowning down, and the GMP standards are completely different to how we operate in food. I'm not suggesting that food production facilities need to adopt everything to that standard, but I think we also need to have a look at very seriously, particularly if we're looking at facilities that run different allergens in different parts of the facility. Sometimes things need to be managed in a much clearer way so that we don't have those undeclared allergens that then we have to say that the packaging is incorrect on.
Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it, Alex Bromage. Now, before you go, Alex, I do want to ask you a key question. If you were up in front of 50 CEOs of startup companies in the food industry, what guidance would you give them in 30 seconds?
Yeah, I would give them the guidance to not focus too much on the technology. I would tell them to try and understand what their consumers want and what their brand promise is, and then to take the requirements that that can build for them, and then go and design the best supply chain process that they can to deliver that. Then they can add the technology on top of that in order to make it as efficient as possible. But you need to start from the first principle of a well-designed supply chain process.
Wonderful. Folks, there you have it, all the way from the US, the British expert in business process, Alex Bromage. If you need help, call Alex. He can certainly give you some guidance with best practices in pharma and how food needs to improve. Alex, thank you so much for
Thanks, John.
taking time to share your knowledge and wisdom with us today, and we'll chat soon.
Appreciate it.